We are now 17 minutes past the scheduled time of this live talk on non duality. I am your host, Russ Rapp, and I'd like to say that I was centering myself and getting into a meditative state in order to relay the message of non duality in a clear and concise, deep way to you in this live talk. But I was actually messing around trying to take uh, thumbnail picture. So I kept trying to retake it to get the one that I liked. So that took some time, and I wanted to make sure my tea was nice and hot and ready to go. So, welcome. We're going to be talking about non duality, specifically, the haters, the ones who watch videos, listen to speakers like myself, and have something to say, have something to criticize or to critique. And how do you deal with that? How do you handle a situation, especially when you're talking about an idea, a concept that is indefensible? There's nothing you can say to defend it. It is literally what it is. So, thank you for joining. If you're joining me live, why is that say disconnected? I was going to say you can chat me in the chat, and I usually like to address that. So they're going to try to reconnect. So hopefully at some point you'll be able to jump in. Otherwise, if you're watching this in syndication, make sure that you like. Well, I don't care if you like. Just subscribe. I'm trying to get 1,000 subscribers so then I can take the show on the road, as they say, and be able to do this on my mobile phone, so I don't have to necessarily sit in the corner, put baby in the corner every time I do these talks. I guess I could set it up elsewhere, but this works. So it's a nice cozy spot to get into this topic. And before I get into that, I guess for those, so yeah, subscribe. That was the main thing you have to do. And why would a non-dual speaker, guru, teacher, master, expert, why would someone talking about non-duality care about subscribers? Doesn't that kind of go against the whole idea of letting things be and being at peace and having life flow, ebb and flow as it does, and we're just drops in an infinite ocean, connected, and blah blah blah. Why would I be asking for subscribers? Doesn't that kind of take away from the credibility of myself as a non-dual speaker? Because I think there's a perception out there, especially if you're familiar with this topic, with this niche idea. You're gonna have an idea of what other speakers say and the approach that they take to this content of non-duality. And so you're gonna say, well, you have to act a certain way. You have to have the uninterested, disinterested stare. You have to be calm, speak in slightly monotone voice that has a nice, slow, even cadence to put you in a slightly sleepy, meditated state. So you can now get an idea of what non-duality is trying to teach. So there's perception of what a teacher should be. And I'm just some guy. I'm just some guy that you'd probably bump into at the grocery store or, walking around town. I like to take the dog for a walk, do that sort of thing. So that's me. But if you're new to non-duality, the word itself says, if we break it apart, non means not, duality means two. So not two. What does that tell you? What does that teach you? Absolutely nothing. So that's what you get out of non-duality. So I can save you a lot of time and effort as far as trying to be a non-dual master, and just let you know right away. That's all you really need to know, is that the word means not two. Well, what's the point of that? What's the meaning? What's the purpose of talking about non-duality? How come I've spent hours and hours talking about the subject, making videos and that sort of thing? It's a great question. And the answer is, I'm not really sure. But I think going back to the perception of what a speaker of non-duality should be or should look like, there's this idea that you can't really talk about your story. Like, I can't talk about my past or my experiences, or talk about the future. I have to live in the ever present now and talk about everything that just comes up and flows out of my mouth. I can't pre-plan what I'm going to say. I can't have a script. I have to be off the cuff but be eloquent and deep at the same time. And so there's this idea, this picture of a speaker. I can't have an ego. I can't have anger. I can't have anxiety or frustration or sadness or feelings of isolation or, a disconnection. I can't feel any of that because I'm somehow now uh, identified as a non-dual speaker, and there it comes with a certain criteria that you have to follow. I can't have a type 5 on the Enneagram personality. I can't talk about religion because religion is just a belief, and non-duality is a negation of beliefs because it's just a belief. There's no point in believing anything. What is there to believe? There's just this. There's just what is. There's just now. There's just the infinite moment. Infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion, that sort of thing. And I can't talk about, of course, you can't talk about politics. That's a definite no because you can't really care or believe in anything. You can't be passionate about anything. You have to just be a sedated NPC. You can't talk about 2000 mules. You can't talk about John Durham or anything like that, because that shows that you somehow have a bias, a perspective, a worldview, and worldviews are just what they are. They're nothing in particular, and I have to fulfill some sort of need that you're looking for. I have to act a certain way. I have to, depending on what needs you're trying to fulfill or whatever you want to project onto me, that's what I'm going to be to you. And so you look at some of the speakers that have more subscribers or viewers or views, then there's oftentimes you can kind of figure out, you know, kind of the niche or the brand, if you will, of what they're trying to get at. Oftentimes, uh, anytime in this in any realm or subject, if you're an attractive female, you typically get more views and eyes, just because that's the nature of human nature. And I guess attractive guys get views too, but I think it's a little bit more slanted the other way. Does that make me a sexist? Can a non-duality speaker be sexist? Probably. I don't know. So I'm here, I guess, to put it plainly, to try and shatter your perception of a non-dual speaker, or what we're supposed to be saying. Get rid of the script, rip up the script of non-duality. There is no person. There's only this. Everything is an illusion. Whatever cliche saying that's being used in the non-dual circles. And I am who I am, and that's that. And is it necessary to shatter your beliefs about non duality and your desires or what you're seeking out of this? No. So that's where we're at. And so, what was the impetus? What was the instigator of, where's my phone? Well, it was some awesome comments that I got on my videos, but I got to grab my phone. So, I wish the chat would actually work. That would be important. Please wait while we try to reconnect you. Hello? Right. Okay. I'm going to say, if you're there, please send me a chat to see if it is working. Here we go. We're going to try it out. See if it's working. In the meantime, I'm going to get my phone. Did you want to go out? Go ahead. I crawl back in my space here. Well, I'm not sure if the chat is working, so that's a little unfortunate, but we'll make do. We'll just keep going. So if you're listening, thanks for joining. All right, so let's read one of my favorite chats from recently. Comment to, let's see which video. Here we go. On my my last live talk, it's the drinking tea and talking non-duality. I got a comment and there's a whole chain of replies afterwards, which you can go check out if you'd like to. But Mark Smith on that video, Mark says, I've been listening to this talk now for almost 17 minutes, and I'm still wondering if Russ has anything significant to say. So far, we've had nothing but lame jokes about drinking tea. This vaguely self-deprecating waffle is pretty feeble. Quote, this is from what I said. That is what the mind does. It tries to create meaning out of reality, which is just human nature. Unquote. Not very impressive. And I asked him, how do you really feel about it? Was that the one? Let's see. Oh, yeah. So then later on, Mark says, in responding to Nathaniel Peterson, do you suppose that the author of this video should be above criticism and that he should only have comments where people admire his work? I have an interest in this subject, and I do not think it is well served by Russ's banalities. So that was some good stuff. I always appreciate, constructive criticism. So let's dig into that a little bit. So a lot of non-duality is just kind of stating the obvious because, this is it. And so when it's kind of like my experience in school in kind of more the sociology type of field or classes that talked about sociology, they do all these like studies in human nature and human behavior, and then they would come up with this theory that was kind of like, yeah, I already knew that, duh. And so when I say, it tries to create meaning out of reality, which is human nature, so that's kind of stating the obvious. Yes, that's what our brains do. It creates meaning, and that's how we function as human beings. So it's kind of like, yeah, so the wind blows or the sun shines. Like, you don't need to tell me that. I kind of already know that. But there's this idea that a speaker has to act in a certain way, has to present themselves in a certain way. And that's where I think the message of non-duality kind of gets lost in the idea of focusing on the messenger or even the message itself. And I have an analogy that's a cliche analogy, but I'm going to explain it a little bit more in depth as it relates to non-duality here in a little bit. But just focusing on the messenger and even how the message is presented is kind of losing the forest for the trees, because non-duality isn't something that you can really directly point to or directly define as a concept. You can kind of you can state what the words mean, and you can use examples or ideas that kind of point in the direction of what non-duality is teaching. But non-duality essentially is not a concept, and so it's not something that you can really take as I know something, I know this is fact. Like, as in the 3D realm, the observable, tangible, dualistic world that we live in, that we experience as humans, that we say is the only reality, that's the only thing that's real, is this idea of interconnected separation. When we think of those terms, we can relate to non-duality as far as um, thinking that it's something that we can obtain, that we can have, that we can define as a fact. So we can find evidence, and that will absolutely point to the truth of non-duality. And I think to some extent, like trying to prove gravity or anything on in quantum mechanics and stuff like that, you can have all these I guess theories and stuff come together. The law of gravity. You can have something that seems to exist in all cases, but as you can see through the history of science, those break down as new discoveries are made. And so, yet those older discoveries that were useful at the time are still useful and still maybe more pragmatic than other ways in certain situations. So like, Isaac Newton and his laws, and this is where I'm going to be really superficial in the discussion because I didn't prepare anything on this. And if you want to look into it further, I'd obviously recommend that. But taking what Isaac Newton taught in his theories of uh, gravity and different things like that, where the law of thermodynamics. Oh, I should study this. Oh my gosh! So he's a non-dual speaker and doesn't even know what Isaac Newton taught. But my point is, his theories may be more useful in certain respects as far as like a practical use versus like Einstein's theories, let's say. Nikola Tesla, his whole thing was, there's no point in coming up with these theories about energy or whatever if we can't use it, if we can't do something with it, then there's no real point to it. There's no meaning for that. And so the discovery in and of itself, the scientific truth in and of itself wasn't important if it wasn't practical, if it wasn't pragmatic. And so you look at something like science and non-duality, they go into the science of the nature of reality, and you can point to the emptiness of space, of energy. You can point to different things, how time bends and quantum mechanics, or however you want to get into the nature of reality. You can point to um, how you can affect one uh, atom over here and instantly throughout space have it affect something light years away. There's a name for that, which I'm forgetting at the moment. But the whole thing is, I'm not a science teacher, and so that's not the point. But the point I'm getting at is there's all these theories that can get to a certain point that maybe alludes to the idea of non-duality, but you can never quite get there. You can never quite say with 100% certainty that non-duality is true and real, because it's untrue and unreal to that which lives in the 3D dualistic world that we live in. And so what happens is you take this concept of non-duality and you turn it into something it's not by saying things like everything is a belief, everything is just an idea, just a concept. This is what is, blah blah blah. And so that becomes in itself, in the production, in the explanation of what non-duality is, becomes the one truth. So it's trying to replace all the other, observable truths of a reality of this existence that we call, you know the world. And it tries to basically negate all those to enter in one ultimate belief that none of those are true. So it's kind of like the idea of, there is no absolute truth, everything is relative. So the paradox, the untruth in that statement itself, is the fact that by saying there are no relatives, or that everything's relative, is an absolute statement. So when you try to say that there are no beliefs and they're just concepts or whatever, it's just reframing a belief with another belief. So it's the mind trying to understand this through the mind. or the separate self through itself, however you want to describe it. Is that making sense? Since the chat doesn't appear to be working, I can't really tell if that's making sense to you or not, but it's fine if it doesn't make sense. That's the kind of the point. So, non-duality, there's this idea that, where was I going with this? Oh my gosh, he doesn't know what to say. How can a non-dual speaker get lost? So this is the point. If I wanted to uh, put on the show of non-duality, I would just literally stare into the camera instead of staring to the side. So you would get a sense that I'm talking directly to you or vibing directly with you in a super relaxed state. There's no need to talk. There's no need to explain. There's just this. It's just love. There's no words to describe it. It's just perfection. It's aliveness. Am I making you feel relaxed, noticed, seen? What is it that you are seeking? What is it that you desire through non duality? What have you come here for? So I could do that for the next half hour if you want. So I can tell you what is right now is I'm frustrated at the fact that I don't have a script and I didn't write anything down. And I had the next thing I was going to say, and it's kind of gone out of my thought process because there are no thoughts that are happening. It's just live. It's a direct connection to consciousness, pure consciousness. I know it had something to do with non-dual speakers and that sort of thing. I think I maybe covered some of it as far as, oh yeah, the idea of beliefs and stuff. It's the dead air on radio. If I had more than one viewer, they'd all just be dropping off right now. What am I getting out of this? What is this? What is this guy saying? Isn't he supposed to be making sense? I guess I could get into the what I was going to talk about, the kind of analogy or metaphor that we can use, but I just don't want to get into it yet. Oh yeah, I do. Oh, okay. That's one other thing. I just thought of it. See, you never know. You want to control the conversation. You want to say exactly how you want to say it. And when it's live and in person, or not in person, I guess it's live on the web. on YouTube, then things happen as they do, and I can go in with the best intentions, even with the script, and still fail. That's life. But as a separate self trying to control reality, that's what we attempt to do, which is like, yeah, obviously. Is it banal? Banal? Is that the right word? So there was the other thing I wanted to cover before I get into the metaphor is there was, and I failed at this too because I tried to find the video before I jumped on here, but I was already late. So maybe if I find it, I'll put it in the description. You can find it. But there was, I think it was like Damon or something. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was talking about non-duality and how all of these new speakers, these youngsters, and he wasn't that old either. He probably was in his 40s, I'm guessing. I don't know. Um, but he was saying how all these 20 somethings, these youngsters who were talking about non duality are getting it all twisted, getting it all confused because it's superficial. They're just saying things, they're just being like a parrot, repeating what others have said, and there's no real depth to it. And just being kind of condescending, haters back off. But what else did he say? Just kind of that's the long and the short of it. But you can watch his video if you can find it. But I'm not doing a very good job at plugging his video. But the thing about non-duality is it has nothing to do with how old you are or your level of uh, personal development, your level of spiritual development, or your depth, or the time that we live in, the culture that we live in. Has nothing to do with um, what you know, what you can express, what you can exhibit. Has nothing to do with anything. So I guess what happens, the confusion of non-duality comes when we conflate these issues of um, these ideas of development versus non-duality. And so there's this idea of depth. So the more depth that we can express as spiritual beings or humans, the more true we can be towards non-duality. And I think there is there is some truth to that in the sense that the more we've kind of dealt with our personal issues, or um, the more depth that we do obtain as far as personal growth and that sort of thing, can exhibit or gets closer to what non-duality is trying to explain. But then we basically conflate the two. So we say that non-duality and increasing or greater depth is the same thing. And so what happens is, like this guy in the video I'm talking about, well, instead of these idiot 20 somethings talking superficially about ideas they don't know about, they're just repeating stuff. They should, we should be talking about the teachings of texts and Ramana Maharshi and all this other stuff, which is all well and good. I'm not trying to you know take away from any of their teachings, but um, Ramana Maharshi, if he was still alive, isn't any more non-dual than you are, because then it's basically negating what non-duality is all about, because it's becoming something it's not, because non-duality is not something, it's not anything. And so when you talk in those terms, you basically turn non-duality into some sort of depth that you can obtain, some pinnacle that you can reach, or achievement, or awakening, or epiphany that you can have. And so it becomes something that you try to be versus what you already are. So that's where it's just another carrot that you can try to obtain. And but what do I know? I'm just a superficial guy that talks in banalities. And so when you conflate the two, then it just becomes another description of another subject, another topic, another idea of human development or depth or whatever. And I don't get me wrong, I think there's obviously things that are important in that topic. I liked I created the coalition viral, which went the opposite of viral. But I had a website back in the day, and I'm sure you can go on um, the Wayback Machine and find it somewhere. But there was kind of taking the idea of Ken Wilber of, you know, um, where he would explain kind of the all quadrants, all levels, as far as, you have internal, external, singular, and plural, like the breakdown, the quadrants of reality. And he kind of pointed to, how do we develop as an individual internally versus culturally versus systemically, or outwardly as individuals. And you can get into that, and he explains it. But the one thing that he didn't really get into that I tried to get a grasp on a little bit more is, like, what are those forces? What are those dynamics of um, growth? Of what's the thing that's pushing? What? How can you describe uh, from this to that what that progression is? And so I described it as, when it comes to increasing growth, increasing um, development, if you will. From an internal singular standpoint, you have greater autonomy. And so you can look at that throughout history. And I'm not going to get into it. Um, through the external aspect of internal, you have greater liberty. Um, you have greater freedom in your world as an individual. There's more cultural diversity, as far as there's a lot of, Henry Ford is a great example of diversity and complexity, as far as, this the separation of duties, essentially, where, instead of one person making one entire car, you have people specialize in different areas. So there's if you look at human development, we can increase our focus in different areas because we're not all scrounging for food and daily subsistence. We can specialize. We can be a carpenter, or a bricklayer, or a welder, or nowadays there's all sorts of things you can do. But there's a greater diversity, and then on the external plural, there is greater complexity, meaning that the diversity is interwoven, interconnected in a more complex way. So just because you have diversity doesn't mean that there's a complex way that it's all interrelated. But through greater growth, greater development, there is more complexity and more diversity, yada yada. So there's boundaries and threats to that. And if you can find that online in the Wayback Machine, you're just going to be super excited. But the reason I bring that up, because I find that all very interesting, but all of that has nothing to do with non-duality. So, even if Ramana Maharshi was still hanging out, you know, his example of how to live, or how to behave, or what to think, or how to be, his example can be something that we can strive for. We can see the benefits. We can see um, how there is a more positive, beneficial aspect to the way he lives his life. But on the flip side, it changes nothing about non duality and the reality of non duality, because that is what it is. And so, because I would still be around, and so would Ramana Maharshi. And so, how do you explain that one? This guy would still be as non-dual as Ramana Maharshi would be. How's them apples? A guy that gets stuck and can't think of the next thing he wants to say because he's not an eloquent speaker. He can't speak like Martin Luther King Jr. and get people excited. He has less than 1,000 followers or subscribers on YouTube. So how can he have anything important to say? He hasn't gone to some school or been, anointed, an expert guru by anyone. He's not the king of the non-dual circles. He doesn't have people sitting in the room listening intently and laughing and following everything and really trying to know what he's trying to say. So there's really no pedigree or credentials that I bring to the table other than the fact that if you think that non-duality is something about what a teacher is or how they say it or what they say, then you're sorely mistaken, because ultimately non-duality, meaning not two, is just pointing out that there is a separation. And I've watched a few other videos recently, or more read them, I guess, instead of watching them, but or listening to them. There's another young woman that talked about, instead of using non-duality, she liked the idea of holy, or like kind of the idea of oneness versus non-duality. But the whole point of non-duality and using it in that negating way is to point out that we already live dualistically. We already think in a certain way. We already see things as separate. And so by not pointing that out, it's easy for the mind to pretend that that fact doesn't exist, that we're not doing that from moment to moment, that we're not creating meaning and separation and definition, um, whether it's through language or just instinct or whatever. And so when you don't point that out, then it's easy for the separate self, mind, ego, whatever you want to call it, to do its magic trick and convince you yet again. And you're now just living another illusion and that sort of thing, which is fine. But when you talk about oneness, you're just talking about something that you are not because you don't believe it, but it's something you become, or it's something that exists that you have to believe in and act a certain way. Otherwise, you are out of the oneness. Except by saying non duality, you're just pointing out the fact that you can't be not one. Not two, meaning you're one, but you're not one. Does that make sense? Probably not. So I'm really disappointed in the fact that there seems to be no chat capabilities in this video, but we're going to still roll with it. So I'm going to get to, if you've been with me for this long, I appreciate it. Hopefully this is entertaining for you. I wish there was more back and forth. That was the whole point in this one. But as is everything in life, you can never, you feel like you can have control. You can raise your hand up and down. You can say, I'm going to say control. I'm going to say control. And I plan that. I plan to say control. But if all of a sudden I had a stroke or heart attack and I planned on saying the word control, it would show you how much lack of control that I actually have. And there's so many other beings in the world that think that they're in control, and we compete for that control. We compete for manifestation of reality, and some people are losers and some people are winners. But we're all non-dual, so it is what it is. But if you look at yourself as a human being, you're a tiny speck on this giant planet in this just enormous galaxy in an infinite universe, or seemingly infinite universe. I don't know. And how much power do you have compared to the sun, or compared to the moon, or the tide of the ocean, the wind, the weather? How much control do you have in a hurricane or a storm? Not much. So that's what happens when you identify with separate self. And how's that going for you? So the metaphor that I want to bring up is this idea of, life is but a dream. So we often use the idea of dreaming, this idea of the waking state versus the dreaming state. And so how do you understand non-duality in this term, in this metaphor of dreaming, when you say Life is but a dream. So, or we're the dreaming. There's no dreamer, but where dreaming happens. I like how Paul Fetterman says it, but what does that really mean? Because when we picture the idea of a dream, what we know as human beings, since we go to sleep, you know, oftentimes on a nightly basis, not everyone, but we sleep for however long and things happen. We have dreams. We get into deep sleep where dreaming kind of seems to fade away. But in the rapid eye movement in the dream state, there's this reality, there's this world that's created that oftentimes we believe in the moment to be what's actually happening because we're not aware, we're not having a lucid moment, a lucid dream where we know that it's a dream and we're aware of it. But we know, even in those moments, that when there is a dream, we're in a dream, that we can wake up from the dream. We know that there's the perception of myself in the bed having the dream. So the the metaphor itself of relating non-duality to dreaming uh, is a dualistic one because that's how we relate to it. And so we try to understand non-duality by saying it's an illusion, it's a dream, it's Maya. Um, and so then what happens through that process is that we ask questions like, well, what's the point, or what's the meaning of life, or if everything's a dream and there's no real consequence, and what's the point of anything, or why should I do anything, or what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning, or how can I be passionate about anything when it's just everything's just happening, but nothing's really happening. There is nothing happening. It's just this. What's the point of that? So it's kind of the confusion that arises when you talk about non-duality as a dream, because there's the dualistic assumption that there is a dreamer having the dream and that there's something you can wake up to. But with non-duality, if you really want to understand it conceptually, it's basically saying that there is no dreamer, and that's where I think Paul Hederman does a good job of describing it as dreaming. But there is no dreamer that can wake up to the dream, because once the uh, assumed dreamer wakes up and becomes aware of the dream, that dreamer that we think exists, that is the ultimate observer, conscious, pure consciousness, whatever, appears in the dream itself. And so if the dreamer that we think is laying in bed, that's now somehow going to awaken with the ultimate epiphany, the knowledge of non-duality, by subscribing to Ramana Maharshi and other gurus, and living according to that, or meditating long enough, or getting into the deepest conscious dream state. When that person awakens from the dream, then it's still within the dream. There's no way essentially to get out of the dream. And so as someone who wants to awaken, who wants to have some sort of infinite non-dual awareness, or whatever the term, pure consciousness, you want your ego or personality to fall away, and now you're traveling lighter, and whatever terminology you want to use, as far as getting rid of the extra baggage, or losing my religion, or getting rid of my concepts or beliefs. There's this idea you have to do that in order to somehow now be non-dual. There is no way to not be non-dual. Yes. So there's no way to wake up from the dream that's not happening. There is no dreamer. Does that make sense? Like, there is no person in this metaphor, there is no dreamer. So there's no one to wake up, because once that awakening appears, once it manifests, it becomes part of the dream. Am I making sense? So there's no way to ever find the observer, no way to ever awaken the dreamer. So that's what we attempt to do when we hear this message from a dualistic uh, mindset. We try to say, okay, well, I'm asleep, I'm uninitiated, I'm uninformed, I am not fully awake. I need to have this experience or have this infinite, perpetual, non-dual, you know, deep emptiness reality. Otherwise, I'm still sleeping. And so I need to awaken from this sleep. So this idea that somehow you're going to awaken as something, you're going to awaken as a dreamer, as a person, as an individual. And that's ultimately what, when speakers talk about there is no person and stuff, is realizing that there's no person to wake up to. And so what does that mean is you don't have to be an NPC, you don't have to be a bumbling fool, you don't have to act a certain way or stare disinterestedly into the camera, or, have a certain belief system that doesn't believe anything. You can actually believe something, and you can study science, and you can do math, and you can, you know, watch political news, you can read a book, or you can, go protest something. You can run for office. You can enjoy food and sex. You can desire things that you don't have. You can want to buy stuff. You can enjoy anything that you want. You can listen to birds chirp and find fulfillment in that. Whatever you want to do, it's within the dreaming that we are experiencing. And so, there is no need for not having beliefs. There's no need for getting rid of something or taking off um, your chains that bind your baggage. Doesn't need to be left by the roadside. It's there, but the beauty, the knowledge, the concept of non-duality, the forgiveness that it brings is pointing to the fact that even if that stuff does appear and does seem to be manifesting, it's not the ultimate truth in a sense, because it is something that is a passing, fleeting moment. It is through time. It is existing and will not exist again. So, in a sense, it's not absolutely real. And so, that's the beauty thing, is that you're not stuck just because you did something in your past that you feel guilty for, or you feel a certain way about yourself, or you can't slow your mind down. You can't stop the thinking. You can't stop behaving in a certain way. You're addicted to drugs and alcohol, or you're abusive, or you allow yourself to be abused. All the stuff that we uh, don't like and don't want to have and try to avoid in our lives, all the stuff that makes us unhappy or unfulfilled or sad or angry or isolated, all that stuff is just part of reality. But the emptiness, the empty fullness in that is pointing to the fact that it's not an infinite, eternal prison sentence. If you- because you can look at non-duality in the sense that you can't awaken from the dream, that you're stuck in this, and you can look at it in a negative way. You can look at it in judgment and say, well, because okay, get this. So if you try to explain to someone who's having a rough day, and you say to that person, this is non-duality, what is? Like, and the guy's like, I just got a parking ticket. My wife filed for, divorce this morning. I haven't eaten in 2 days because I can't afford it. Um, let's see. I've got an ingrown toenail. You know, this guy, my bookie wants to. Is it the bookie? I owe the mob money, and they're threatening to come bust my knees if I don't pay them up in the next week. And I'm having a great day. So you're telling me the message of non-duality is what is. And so, well, I think what is sucks. I don't want to experience this. I don't want what is. And so you can take your non-duality, your non-dual stuff, and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. So that's can be the response to the idea of non-duality from someone that wants nothing of it. And can you blame that person? But that's just a story, which is fine. And it doesn't require someone to drop the story or to believe that everything is great when they don't feel that way, because accepting what is, it's the radical acceptance that I talked about in another video. The idea that you don't have to accept it as being good or bad or make a judgment call. You just have to accept that it is. And there's power in that, because it's admitting that you can't do it all. You're not in control. It's basically saying that what is what is happening. And then you can get rid of all the other crap if you want, and just deal with what's right in front of you, instead of making up a story that gets in the way. And there's a freedom in all of that. The message of non-duality is the basis of the freedom um, that we have. It's the basis of human development or spiritual growth. Um, because if it were true that you were absolutely one way or absolutely this way or that way, then there would be no way to change. And so that's not to say that there isn't a habitual manifestation, in a sense we call, um, if you get rid of the ego personality structure, you can call it a soul, or energy body, or point of light, or whatever. We inhabit a certain energy field, and so in a sense that's us. And then we have all those structures on top of it. That's yet another identification. But there's through that identification of emptiness, then we can be free to um, handle change, accept change, because change is inevitable in the manifestation of reality. If you try to hold on to this, it's going to fall through your fingers like sand through an hourglass. It's just going to change and adapt and grow one way or the other, whether you like it or not. You can't stop time. If there's a button to stop time, that's what we're looking for in a lot of ways, because we feel out of control when we realize that there's so many things that are happening that we can't control, and it just keeps on rolling, it keeps on moving. The tide keeps turning, the winds of change keep blowing, and we can't do anything about it. But in all the storm and all the winds and the hurricane, through all of that, there's a stillness, there's an absoluteness to reality that can't be changed, that can't be shaken. There's empty ground, a groundless being that we are, that doesn't falter, that doesn't shatter, that doesn't change, that doesn't break, that allows us to be able to grow and develop. Because without that, if we were something that was, um, I can't remember how Paul Hederman, I've been plugging him a lot because I haven't watched a lot of his new stuff, but the stuff I have watched is good. But he describes it in a certain way, um, long lasting, whatever self, independent self. I can't remember how he worded it, but the idea that, if there was something that were um, real in the sense of absolute, then that couldn't be changed. But that which we see, which we perceive, that which we identify with as ourselves, can be changed through the identification, through the fact that we can perceive it or define it. The definition, the keys to the kingdom, the freedom that is inherent in all reality, is in the fact that, in the definition of itself, in the fact that we create the meaning, because the keys to undoing are in the definition of itself. So um, how do you become free? Why do non-dual speakers talk about duality all day and talk about the illusion? Is because through the recognition of the illusion, there is a power to undo the ties that bind, the chains that we shackle ourselves with. Um, so you can't really point to non-duality, but you can point to the illusion of the magician's trick, the sleight of hand, the shell game. You can point to that, and through that, we can find ways to loosen our grip on our attachments, if you will. That's not necessary, but it's a part of human experience that happens, whether you like it or not. And so that's where I can understand, since we relate to all of this dualistically as something that we grow in depth or change or develop, it's easy to tie that in with the message of non-duality, because that's all that we experience. That's what we understand as human beings. But non-duality is completely unique and special and separate, in a sense, from what we perceive in reality, because it it holds all of that, but it's not that, if that makes sense. Probably not. Non-duality includes duality. Let's just say it like that. Because if you define non-duality as something that we can relate to, then it becomes something it's not. It becomes a thing. In a sense, non-duality is no thing, because it's everything and nothing. It's real and unreal. Whatever cliche you want to use. Well, I wish there was some chat capability here so we can round this out, but it is what it is. I hope you had fun. I appreciate everyone for joining. Even though you can't really get anything out of non-duality itself, I'm not necessarily saying that you can't necessarily get something out of these talks, because there's a lot more going on than just talking about non-duality. Because we're never really talking about non-duality. It's kind of the focus of the conversation, but it's always just skirting the periphery. It's you know living in the fray. It's dwelling in the fringes. But you got to say something, otherwise there's nothing. So there's nothing in something. So we talk about things, and maybe you get something, or maybe you don't. Maybe you think I'm just a babbling brook of banalities. But if you do get something out of this, then that's great, because as a human being, that's some of the intention of this, is to communicate something to you. And maybe it's just clearing up how you perceive non-duality, so you don't fall for the other uh, endless tricks of the mind. Well, unfortunately, since there are no chats, I can't get much for a response, but we're towards the end of the video. So we're at 17 minutes after. So we're right at 1 hour. So I will just want to say that thank you for listening. And if you made it this far, congratulations. You definitely should subscribe to my channel. I may or may not make another one of these videos, but thank you.